You're watching All 24 News World News Program, and up next are tonight's top stories. Algeria refused to vote on the UN Western Sahara resolution, criticizing it for ignoring the Polisario Front and the Sahrawi people's right to self-determination. President Tebboune marks the revolution's 71st anniversary, affirming its legacy is the compass that guides Algeria's future. In Sudan, RSF bombing in South Kordofan causes casualties. Meanwhile, there are urgent calls to aid those fleeing abuses in Al-Fashar and for a UN investigation into the violations there. Welcome back to the program. Leading on news tonight, Algeria decided on Friday not to participate in the vote on the Security Council draft resolution renewing the mandate of MINURSO, considering that it does not meet its aspirations and does not include an explicit reference to the proposal of the Polisario Front, the legitimate and sole representative of the people of Western Sahara. This decision came after arduous negotiations conducted by Algerian diplomacy, leading to transforming the draft resolution proposed by the United States to the Security Council, practically aimed at liquidating the Western Sahara issue into a more balanced resolution that reaffirms the fundamental principles of international law and United Nations Charter, foremost among them the right of the Sahrawi people to self-determination and the confirmation of the basic standards for resolving the conflict. In his address, Algeria's permanent representative to the UN, Ammar Benjama, underlined the substantial changes that had been brought to the initial text.
En tant que pays voisin des protagonistes au Sahara occidental.
As a neighboring country to the protagonists in Western Sahara, Algeria has engaged in good faith and with a constructive spirit in the negotiation of the text that was proposed to us. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank the penholder, the United States, which, unlike what happened last year, spared no effort to improve the text and reach a compromise between the stakeholders. A compromise that could have united all the members of the Council. Of course, and we openly acknowledge this, substantial improvements have been made to the initial text. First, by recalling the fundamental parameters of a just and lasting solution to the Western Sahara conflict. Second, by enshrining the inalienable right of the people of Western Sahara to self-determination. And finally, by committing both parties, the Kingdom of Morocco and the Polisario Front, to good faith negotiations without preconditions under the auspices of the United Nations.
Mr. Benjama also slammed the draft resolution as creating an imbalance between the two parties at issue by focusing only on the territorial ambitions of one side and remaining silent about the aspirations of the other, in this case the Sahrawi people who are demanding the right to self-determination and freedom.
This text creates an imbalance between the two parties at issue by focusing solely on the territorial ambitions of one side and remaining silent on the aspirations of the other, in this case the Sahrawi people who are claiming their freedom. The evidence is that this resolution, this text, ignores the proposals of the Polisario Front, even though they were recently submitted to the United Nations Secretary-General and the Security Council and published in the document number S-2025-66-4. It is a party to the conflict, and its opinion must be heard, if not taken into consideration.
Slovenia, for its part, welcomed the renewal of the mandate of the United Nations mission for the referendum in Western Sahara MINURSO for an additional year. The permanent representative of Slovenia to the United Nations, Samuel Bogar, stressed that MINURSO plays a critical stabilization and a monitoring role in Western Sahara, hailing the renewal of its mandate.
We thank the United States as the penholder.
We believe that MINURSO is a critical stabilizing and monitoring presence, and we welcome that its mandate has been renewed for 1 year. We also supported the text as we see there is a need and an opportunity for real progress towards a just, lasting and mutually acceptable solution as we fast approach the 50th anniversary of the conflict.
Spanish political parties reaffirmed their support for the Sahrawi people's right to self-determination and denounced the Moroccan occupation's ongoing repression and human rights violations in Western Sahara. The Unidas Podemos group submitted a motion to the Albacete City Council urging Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez's government to end its backing of the Moroccan colonial plan and press for a fair, free and credible referendum on self-determination. Spokesperson Nivaz Navarro said the initiative reflects Spain's moral and political duty to uphold international law.
We emphasize the necessity of Spain to assume its historical and legal responsibility as a former colonial power and administering authority of the territory. The Spanish government not only failed to uphold its international obligations in 1975, but continues today its deplorable stance of silence, indifference, and complicity with the occupation.
For its part, the United Left political alliance in Valladolid urged the regional government to step up its support for the Sahrawi people. In a statement, the group pledged to push for stronger commitments in upcoming government sessions to back the Sahrawi cause.
The Sahrawi people need to be masters of their own destiny, and in addition to humanitarian support and solidarity, Spain must take political stance that enables the Sahrawis to escape the state of forced exile in which they live.
The Sahrawi government or community in Spain reaffirmed its commitment to the Sahrawi people's right to self-determination and independence during its annual meeting of associations and federations across the country. According to the Sahrawi news agency, participants reiterated their support for the Polisario Front as the sole legitimate representative of the Sahrawi people and rejected any initiatives contrary to the international law or their right to sovereignty. Moving on to another topical news story. Tonight, Algerian President Abdelmadjid Tebboune called for honoring the sacrifices of those who fought in the War of Independence, describing their legacy as a source of strength and unity that continues to guide Algeria in building its national state. In his message marking the 71st anniversary of the revolution, President Abdelmadjid Tebboune urged the revival of the national spirit and patriotic resolve to safeguard Algeria amid regional instability and growing global tensions.
On this 71st anniversary of the outbreak of the glorious Liberation War, while we proudly celebrate the glory of generations who fought relentless battles across every corner of Algeria, we do so to make loyalty to their sacrifices a source of strength and determination, and an authentic fountain from which a collective consciousness, connected to our glorious history, continues to draw. It is the compass that guides Algeria, at this delicate stage, toward consolidating the foundations of the emerging national state and toward kindling the unifying national spirit that fuels the will of sincere patriots and the energy of active, living forces, especially the youth, to ensure the nation's resilience in the face of the volatile conditions within our regional environment and the intense conflicts and fractures marking today's world order. All this through reliance on our own capacities, on an emancipated, wealth-generating economic performance, and on the awareness and patriotism of Algeria's sons and daughters, who on this occasion stand proud and dignified as builders of the present and the future, following in the footsteps of our righteous martyrs. May Allah cover their pure souls with His mercy, guided by the will of the sincere people working to advance the homeland and serve the people.
President Abdelmadjid Tebboune affirmed that the glorious Liberation Revolution remains a historic turning point rooted in decades of popular resistance and national struggle, during which the Algerian people endured immense suffering under settler colonialism.
Together, on this 1st of November, we commemorate the day when the Algerian people ignited the glorious and blessed Revolution of Liberation. It was a historic and decisive day that came after long, harsh, and bloody decades of popular resistance and national struggle, during which our people endured immense suffering as they confronted the settler colonialism, standing firm against its greed and its sinful aggression, rejecting by every means of resistance available the confiscation of their land, the desecration of their history, and the obliteration of their identity.
In his message, President Tebboune stressed that the successive stages of resistance embodied the Algerian people's steadfast attachment to their land, history, and deeply rooted national identity throughout the dark years of colonial rule.
Throughout its successive stages, the resistance expressed the steadfast attachment of the Algerian people to their land, their history, and their deeply rooted Algerian identity throughout the gloomy colonial era. It was a heroic accumulation that ultimately led to the armed struggle, a comprehensive war of liberation that claimed the lives of millions of martyrs, widows, orphans, and wounded. It affirmed the spirit of resistance embedded in the Algerian character and instilled in the nation's conscience a profound sense of pride and vigilance over national sovereignty.
Minister Delegate to the Minister of National Defense and Chief of Staff of the People's National Army, General Said Chingriha, affirmed that November 1st marks a milestone to reflect on the values and principles of the revolution and to emulate the virtues of its heroes. In his message marking the outbreak of the War of Liberation, Chingriha called for upholding the spirit of the revolution amid a complex international and regional context, urging vigilance, awareness, and unity to preserve Algeria's stability.
On this eternal national occasion, I would like to point out that we must all take great care to ensure that our celebration of such glorious milestone in our timeless history does not become mere rituals or folkloric festivities. Rather, we must seize these moments to recall the values and principles of this unique revolution, to emulate the noble qualities of those who carried it out, and to apply them in our daily lives, because the complex international geostrategic context and the turbulent regional environment compel us, more than ever, to maintain the highest levels of awareness, vigilance, and caution, and to exert persistent and diligent efforts to face the challenges of this context and deal with its consequences with wisdom and effectiveness. I firmly believe that aspiring to win the battles of the present and the future requires, above all, drawing strong moral and motivational energy from the source of our national history, rich with epics and heroism.
Algeria marks the 71st anniversary of the November 1st Liberation Revolution, when the Algerian people offered unparalleled sacrifices to free themselves from colonial rule. This historic day remains a symbol of resilience and a cornerstone in the nation's path toward progress and strength among nations. The report by Mariam Zian.
71 years have passed since the outbreak of the November 1st revolution, a revolution that freed its people and inspired nations aspiring to break free from the yoke of occupation. The declaration of November 1st reignited the flame of a revolution against a ruthless colonial power that thought the struggle was over and that the people had forgotten. It was a declaration that charted the course of the revolution, illuminated the road to freedom, shaped one of the greatest uprisings in history, and laid the foundations of independent Algeria. What followed were 7 years of relentless fighting, led by Algerian young men and women, through which the Algerian people forged the most inspiring model of resistance in the 20th century, carving a path to greatness with the blood of their martyrs and the sacrifice of 1.5 million souls. Guided by the ideals of the November Revolution, this historic day stands as a milestone in the building of the modern Algerian state, strengthening its place among nations through a record rich in social and political achievements and firm diplomatic principles. in loyalty to those who nourished the homeland with their blood and their sacrifices. The 1st of November marked a defining moment for post-independent Algeria, the beginning of the nation's reconstruction and development after the battle for liberation. Rooted in the social vision of the November Declaration, Algeria embarked on a path of nation edification that touched every sector, culminating today in vast economic and infrastructural achievements, stretching from east to west and from north to south. True to its identity, Algeria never allowed its nation-building efforts to distract it from its continental depth or its commitment to just causes. It has long been a leading voice in advocating fairness for Africa within international institutions, foremost among them the United Nations Security Council. From the world's highest international platform, the United Nations record bears witness to Algeria's firm, clear, and consistent positions in defense of the Palestinian people and their just cause, a cause that has long been a cornerstone in Algerian diplomacy. On this anniversary of the glorious November Revolution, Algeria once again reaffirms its unwavering commitment to its principles, its proud history, and its sacred values, not only through mutual respect and equality, but through a deep devotion to its national memory.
And in the Gaza file tonight, 3 Palestinians, including one who later died of his wounds, were killed on Friday morning in occupation airstrikes and gunfire across the Strip, another clear violation of the ceasefire. According to medical staff and local sources, 1 man was killed when Zionist forces bombed his home in Al-Abasan al-Kabira east of Khan Yunis, while another lost his life to injuries from an earlier strike on a tent sheltering displaced families in Al-Mawasi. A third was shot dead on Al-Jalat Street in Gaza City. Occupation forces also opened fire on civilians in Jabalia and Khan Yunis and shelled the Shujaiya neighborhood, leaving more casualties and deepening fears the fragile truce could collapse. UNRWA reaffirmed on Friday that it continues its vital humanitarian mission in the Gaza Strip despite the dire conditions facing the population. The agency said its schools, now serving as temporary shelters, provided a safe haven for displaced families, while its teams worked to help them rebuild their lives with dignity. UNRWA added that more than 12,000 of its staff in Gaza remain on duty each day, delivering education, healthcare, and essential aid to those in need. The the Palestinian Islamic Resistance Movement Hamas condemned the occupation's new settlement plan in the occupied West Bank, calling it a dangerous escalation of the Judaization policies. In a statement, Hamas said the move to approve nearly 2,000 new settlement units just a day after authorizing 1,300 aims to entrench a colonial reality that fragments the West Bank and isolates Al-Quds from its Palestinian surroundings, in a clear violation of international law and UN resolutions. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova warned that the Zionist entity's annexation of the West Bank would fuel serious tensions in the Middle East. She stressed that the Palestinian issue must be resolved through political and diplomatic means, calling for direct negotiations between both sides to achieve lasting peace, and cautioned that any escalation would undermine international peace efforts. Switching focus to the war in Sudan now. Several Sudanese civilians were killed and others wounded on Friday as the Rapid Support Forces launched heavy artillery strikes on residential areas in Kadugli, South Kordofan. Local media reported that the shelling left 5 civilians dead, including 2 children and 3 women, and injured 13 others amid escalating violence in the region. The Darfur Displaced Persons and Refugees Coordination Committee urged urgent care for civilians fleeing Al-Fasher after suffering grave abuses by the Rapid Support Forces. Committee spokesperson Adam Rajal told All24 News on Friday that the RSF committed serious violations, including murder torture, humiliation, and rape, stressing the urgent need for psychological support for children traumatized by the ongoing violence.
حقيقة الوضع الإنساني كارثي.
The humanitarian situation is truly catastrophic and horrific for the people who fled the recent events in Al-Fashir. Upon arriving in the area, they were subjected to grave human rights violations, including murder, sexual violence and rape, looting, intimidation, humiliation, and more. They lost all their belongings and are now in dire need of shelter and other essential supplies. Psychological support is also crucial for the children who live through these horrific conditions. They urgently need child-friendly spaces.
برضو محتاجين مساحات صديقة للأطفال.
The United Nations called for transparent investigations into the violations committed by the Rapid Support Forces in Al-Fashir, North Darfur. During a press conference on Friday, several UN agencies stressed the need to hold the RSF accountable for the crimes documented in UN reports and urged the international community to increase pressure on those financing and fueling the conflict. Members of the Sudanese community are set to hold demonstrations in several Western capitals to denounce the Rapid Support Forces crimes in Al-Fashir, North Darfur. Sources told All24 News on Friday that human rights organizations have called for global vigils and protests to condemn the RSF's atrocities against civilians in Al-Fashir and Bara, as well as to expose external parties backing the ongoing genocide against the Sudanese people. Elsewhere in Africa, the A3+ reaffirmed its support for the UN efforts to help Libya achieve peace and stability, stressing the importance of a Libyan-led political solution and respect for the country's sovereignty. At the UN Security Council session on renewing UNSMEL's mandate, Ambassador Benjama called on behalf of the A3+ group for the immediate withdrawal of all foreign forces in full respect of the country's sovereignty and independence. Switching focus to the war in Ukraine, the tide of confrontations between Russia and Ukraine intensifies as fresh exchange of attacks has taken place on the border. Usama Ayadi reports.
The escalation of the war between Russia and Ukraine rages as new attacks have been reported on the bordering regions between the two countries. Local authorities reported that the western city of Oryol is facing restrictions on heat and water supplies after Ukrainian drones struck a pipeline at a local power plant on Friday. In a retaliatory move, Russia launched an overnight attack on the northeastern Ukrainian city of Sumy, injuring 11 residents, including 4 children, according to Ukraine's emergency services. Video released by Ukrainian authorities captured the night sky illuminated by explosions, with firefighters battling blaze and civilians evacuating the area.
The strike was complex, a combined, deliberately calculated one, designed to make it difficult to counter. There were missiles, including ballistic ones, and air-launched ballistic types. In total, 52 missiles and more than 600 strike drones were launched. Around 400 of them Shahids. Most of the drones were neutralized, and 2/3 of the missiles were also shot down.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky condemned recent attacks on the Donetsk region near the front line, describing them as strictly terror. In his nightly video address, he emphasized that energy facilities were primary targets in overnight Russian drone and missile strikes.
Ukraine's air defense is saving a significant part of our infrastructure, and this remains the top priority. Air defense systems and missiles for them. We are working on this every day, and also our long-range capabilities, our entirely justified response to what Russia is doing against Ukraine and our people.
The Russian Ministry of Defense reported on Thursday that its forces had taken control of 2 settlements over the past day and struck Ukrainian long-range drone assembly and storage sites, railway infrastructure, ammunition depots, and temporary deployment points. Russian officials also stated that their air defense systems shot down or destroyed 8 precision-guided aerial bombs, 3 US-made HIMARS rockets, and 192 fixed-wing drones. The exchange of attacks underscores the intensifying strikes on civilian infrastructure and energy sites by both sides, deepening the impact of the ongoing war.
And that brings us to the end of our news program for tonight. Thank you for tuning in. Good night.